Hello and welcome to this month's Dr. Pool's SharePoint Surgery session, Creating Project Management Solutions Using SharePoint. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Pool, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard works directly with Harmony field teams and partners. Bringing with him 17 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize significant benefits in productivity enabled by collaborative platforms. Richard earned his Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody who's joined us today. So the topic for today's discussion is project management, and this can obviously apply to lots of different industries. Lots of different use cases, but primarily there's some very obvious examples, like the construction industry, where like any type of work that's carried out for a particular initiative is really based around a project, and it has lots of timescales and lots of people involved and different companies and lots of moving parts as well in terms of collaborating between each other, and lots of changes and things. But also some other examples are things like the automotive industry, where a new vehicle can be considered a project, or aerospace industry, an entire aircraft. And typically, the life cycle of projects can vary quite greatly from it could even be something like a marketing project that might run for a few weeks, or it could be a car being designed that's going to take a few years, or an aircraft, or a building that you have to take into account things like all the maintenance as well, that can really go on for decades in reality. So we'd just like to ask you a quick question to see how you're currently working.
So how do you currently manage project documentation, communication, calendars, and tasks? SharePoint, Exchange, Microsoft Project, file shares, or another project management system? And we'll give you a second to answer. And not surprising, most people are using SharePoint. But let's... Okay. There you go, Richard.
Excellent, thank you, Susan. So yeah, absolutely. We can see that over half of the audience are definitely using SharePoint for project management in one way or another. Obviously, there's a combination of other kind of systems. For example, documents still residing on some file shares. Maybe some people are using Microsoft Project to map out a project and plan it generally. And public folders in Exchange or shared mailboxes, etc. So I think that's fairly representative of typical marketplace. So yeah, I mean, obviously SharePoint is quite prevalent there. So if we take a look at the kind of typical challenges involved in running and managing projects, now, as I say, Microsoft Project is an example of a kind of project planning tool, really. To map out, the scope of the project, the timelines, the milestones, and the tasks, for example. It's great for creating like a Gantt chart. But the maintaining of that is really kind of like the next big challenge, really. And that's just it. Projects have, as I said before, lots of different moving parts. People can change, the the companies involved, whether they're like subcontractors and clients and suppliers, but also there can often be unforeseen events. There could be delays with suppliers, or there could be in construction, weather could play a big part in delays, or materials not being available, or resources not being available, and things. So there's as I say, a lot of changes going on pretty much every day throughout a project, and as I say, that can range between short projects to really, really long projects as well. But I think something that's common amongst all projects is, you obviously put a plan together and you have a budget for that and a timescale. Those change, and typically a lot of projects end up overrunning or overspending, and it's important to know kind of where the overspend or where the delays actually were, so that you don't make the same mistakes again for your next project, because obviously you could have lots of different projects on the go at any point in time, and they're all starting at different stages and are at different stages of their kind of project life cycle at any point in time. But you do need to kind of find out, what the traceability of who said what and when. So, for example, email is very important to kind of be able to capture project-related emails and documents in the same place, and make them available to everybody involved, but obviously in a secure way. And I think there's lots of scope there for trying to find a single system where you can manage everything that relates to the project in one hit, and but throughout the process, not just during the planning and the kind of concept stages, but also during the execution of a project and the maintenance of that project once it's actually been released or gone live. There can be years of maintenance that need to be managed as well. And also accessing all of that content, all of that information, wherever you're spending your time. So not just on a PC, but also in a browser, on mobile devices, whether people are on site, at a building site, for example, or it could be infrastructure or transport projects and those kind of things, where actually maybe even connectivity isn't too great, isn't too reliable. And then it could well be multinational projects as well. So all of those things bring in different challenges. So is SharePoint the best solution for that? And I think as we saw before, over 50% of everyone that's joined is using SharePoint to some degree for project management, and it is a great platform. I think it's a single platform that you can manage calendars and tasks and documents and emails and things in as well. But I think on its own, it can be a real challenge, because people may have come from, let's say, a kind of bespoke system for particular kind of requirements, or they may have come from a number of different systems where there's kind of key advantages to each of those systems for different stages or for different reasons. So on its own, SharePoint can be a bit of a challenge, but with Harmony as a front end to SharePoint, available in your email client, as well as from mobile devices and Office applications and things as well, means that you have a complete solution. End users can work from within their familiar comfort zone, the applications that they actually have open all the time, and also having a consolidated single interface, so that, for example, throughout the life cycle of a project, you can use, for example, OneDrive to access and manage your initial concepts, your initial ideas before you've even shared them with somebody, and then share them with a group or a team, so that you can give other people access to that, get their feedback, and then once it's actually got approval, manage that in a more structured way in SharePoint, in team sites and things, and create calendars and task lists. So on that point, we'd also like to ask those users who are using SharePoint another question.
So if you are using SharePoint to manage your projects, which type of data are you using? And you can select more than one answer. Documents, tasks, calendars, contacts, custom lists. Okay. Here you go. Let's see the results.
Okay, thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody for answering. As we can see, I think everybody's using SharePoint for document management, but it's also interesting that you are using SharePoint beyond that around the projects as well. So a mixture really of task calendars, contacts, and lists as well. So that's interesting, and I think we saw some similar results on a previous session as well. So thank you for that. So let's take a look at how Harmony can actually help address some of those challenges, because I think the first thing is really collaborating, because in a project you're not working on something on your own. You are working with a project team, project managers, and all the resources that need to support that as well. And very often that could be with external partners, it could be with other departments, and it could be with suppliers and things as well. So there's a number of challenges there, capturing emails, capturing documents, sharing information, and actually working with things like metadata and version control. So let's just take a look at how that actually surfaces itself in Harmony. So on the desktop, Harmony is a sidebar within Outlook. As we said before, Outlook's really kind of the application that people spend a lot of their time in. So when people are in front of a PC, Outlook is a great place to actually give people what they need, because it's familiar to them and they can access everything from there. But making it as easy as possible to capture information, both emails and documents, work on that content and share content as well. So if we take a look at, for example, I've got a number of sites and libraries here that I've connected to. And let's take this construction site as an example, just because we've got some data in there that we're going to use for the purposes of today's demonstration. So here we can see that I've got access to not only my document libraries, but also any other lists and things that I have access to as well. So here is an example. I've got some project tasks, and I can create tasks from here. I can view and edit the tasks directly from the sidebar as well. So I can keep up to date with the elements of the actual project that are driving the timeline, and whether we're going to actually meet our deadlines and milestones and things. But let's take a look at some document management to start with, because that's kind of like the main use case I think that most of you have kind of highlighted in the last poll question. And then so you can see here all the documents that relate to this project that I have permission to access. I can go into things like document sets and folders and libraries and things. I can easily navigate around my my project content. And we can see here that I've actually captured a few emails already that relate to this particular project. And actually, I've received some further dialogue, maybe some approval for the project that I'm working on by email. And I want to capture that for future reference. So we've got something to go back to when maybe if questions were asked about, have you actually received approval for this and those kind of things. So if I just drag and drop that email that I've received, Harmony will upload that email into SharePoint. It's stored then as a fully contained MSG file, so other people can access that content from SharePoint. And you'll see that Harmony is also setting, for example, the content type for my emails. It's automatically mapping the header information from those emails, the subject, who it was sent from and to, and those kind of things. So if there's additional metadata that you want the user to add, then they can obviously do that from that interface as well. But I'm just using that as an illustration just to show you some of the information that's coming through. And we can see obviously We've got a nice view configured there just to show the email dialogue in this particular library and who it was sent from. So I can kind of sort, search, and filter by any of that kind of information that I'm displaying from the views in the library. But also, I think one of the more important things is actually the documentation that supports this project as well. And in this case, I may have received some documentation by email. In this case, it's a contract. So I can easily drag and drop that in exactly the same way into the Harmony sidebar. And then I'm actually prompted to choose the content type. So Harmony supports all of the different content types that you've got configured in your SharePoint libraries. In this case, I'm going to select that it's a proposal for a project. And again, here we can see that I've got the opportunity to add or update and edit any metadata as it goes in. But we can also see that it's actually picking up the defaults from the library and also any file properties that may exist in those documents. So I'm just going to save that into that library as well. And I've also actually got some documentation that I've been working on locally. So maybe I've, again, lots of people said that they were using file shares to manage documentation. Now getting that into SharePoint using Harmony is really straightforward. So for example, here I've got some drawing plans that I want to share with my project team. So I can drag and drop multiple items from Windows Explorer into the sidebar here. And again, I'm prompted to choose the content type here because I've got different content types defined. So I'm going to put those all in as plans, and obviously the corresponding metadata will be displayed for that type of content. At this point, it's uploading those in the sidebar, so it's not blocking my Outlook, so I can still carry on working with the rest of my email system. But here we can see those 3 plans that we're just putting in, and maybe I want to tag those with some information just to say, let's say that Fred is the project manager for this particular project that I'm working on. So getting that content into SharePoint is very easy with Harmony. And I think it's something that people find quite challenging without Harmony. Likewise, if I want to share some content with my project team members, let's say I want to send one of these plans to one of my colleagues. So let's just compose a new email and say, actually, I need to share this document with one of my colleagues, Ran. And this is the floor plan. And then I can simply drag and drop documents into the body of the email to actually send that document to Ran, who's working on this project with me. In this case, I'm sending a SharePoint link. Now that has a massive knock-on effect that when Ran receives that link, he can click on it to open it up from SharePoint, or he can just right-click on it and say open in Harmony, and that operation will take him directly to that document in the Harmony sidebar. From there, he can take a look at the version history, the properties. He can preview the content as well to see actually, what that document is, and then open it up into the native application, for example. But also, I might not actually know if Ran has access to this particular document because I'm just sending him a link. So when I hit send, Harmony will actually assess whether Ran does have access to that link. And if there's multiple people, it will do the same for everybody on the distribution list. And anybody it finds who doesn't have access will actually prompt me and show me this information here. And at that point, I can choose to either grant view or edit capabilities to the people that I'm sending this link to. Now that's using SharePoint functionality, the kind of share function in the latest versions of SharePoint on-premise and online. But maybe I need to send it to somebody external who I'm not going to give access to any of my SharePoint content. It might be the client, it might be a supplier or whatever. So in that case, I may need to actually send it as an attachment, and I can do that just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop, and the document is then attached to the email. So I can work both with internal and external collaborators in the ways that I actually need to. So let's just close that email for a second. Now the next challenge is, how do you stay informed of updates to new information, and how do I access that content from different places? So we've taken a bit of a look so far at the Outlook integration, but we also have integrations to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, as well as mobile applications as well. So if we take a look at Harmony Mobile on a tablet, in this case an iPad, we can see that I can actually access the same content that I had on my desktop from my mobile device. Now, in a project, particularly again, if it's a project that involves being out and about on site at maybe a remote location, being able to access that content from your phone or from a tablet, even while you're disconnected, is really important. So we can see here that I've got access to the same locations that I had on my desktop. So we're actually synchronizing the sites that you're actually looking at and using. So if we dive into that construction site like we did on the Outlook integration, again, we can see all of the project task list, for example, and other areas. So let's just take a look at a task list for a moment. And we can see here that actually there's some tasks that are outstanding that I need to work on. So I can go ahead and update one of these tasks and say that I actually want to start the process. Now, obviously, if there's any workflow events tied to that, they will get invoked on the server side, and Harmony will work those accordingly. Likewise, if I just go back a level, we can see the calendar for this project. Now, this is a SharePoint calendar, so I can see all the events that are taking place for that particular project. And I can see that there was actually a project kickoff meeting in London earlier today. So I can also see if there's any attachments to those items and events and things. I can also follow any of this information for activity as well, and we'll see that a little bit later on. But let's take a look at some of the documentation that we captured from my desktop a minute ago. Again, if we go into the library, we can see the folders, the document sets, the documents, etc., that we're actually working on. And let's just dive into this particular project. So here we can see, let's say, those floor plans that we sent out to the project team. And in this case, I want to view and maybe make some changes or make some comments to that particular plan. So in this case, I'm actually maybe on site where this building is being planned. And we can see that actually there's a delay because something is in the way. Actually, in reality, this room here or this wall actually needs to be moved, in a particular direction or something like that. So I can actually go ahead and add some comments here to say this wall needs to be relocated. And then I can save those annotations back to the document in SharePoint as a new version. I've got a number of options here. I can save it as different versions, different documents, or in different locations as I need. But here we can see that I've now created a new version of that document. And if we take a look at the same information on the desktop client, and just refresh that for a second. We can see that there was a new version created by Annie, who's working on this project, and I can see the information that has actually been changed. So there's those annotations that we just added while out in the field from my colleague. Now, the other thing is you don't necessarily go looking to see what's been changed all the time, because there's lots, as I said before, lots of different moving parts, lots of different events going on. And in that case, how do you actually get notified that maybe a task has been assigned to you, or that a task is now overdue, or that a document's been changed, or that a milestone has been changed or something? So Harmony has an update stream in both the desktop and the mobile application to actually inform you that there's new events or there's new changes. So let's take a look at that actually in both interfaces to say, look, I've added this as a favorite location, but then I want to follow it for activity. So whenever somebody else adds some content here or updates some content or information, then I'll be notified about it. And the way that you get notified about that is a red dot will appear in the Harmony sidebar when there are new updates. And that red dot will actually take you to that information. So here I can see I'm actually working on a number of different projects here, but I just want to see updates from a few of them. And in this case, I can see that Dave, who's working on this project, has actually assigned a new task to me. So I can simply click on that task to go directly to it, and I can start working on it now. So I can see it's due in a few days' time. So I can start to work on it. I can see if there's any attachments, and maybe you can see that I've already started doing a bit of the work on that, and it's in progress. Now, something else around projects is, obviously, if you're in a company where your project's based, one project might be different from the next, but there's also a lot of commonality. So, there may be, other similar projects that you've used in the past that you can reuse some of the data from. So being able to search for existing content, existing data and information, and then being able to copy that into a new project and start working on it directly from a single interface is really time saving. So if we take a look at that on the desktop here, we can see that I can perform a search across an entire site to say I'm looking for anything where proposals have been handled before, and there it's doing a SharePoint search. So everything that's being indexed by your SharePoint services are being returned here based on the criteria that I'm searching on. So here I can say, well, actually, there's a proposal for some existing information there. Again, I can preview it from here to see if it's relevant or not. I can open it up into the location it came from, or I can simply just copy that document and actually move it into, or move a copy into the project that I'm working on now. So let's go into my new project and say here, I actually want to paste that document. Again, then I can create the content or choose the content type and fill in all the metadata for that particular document. But it means I'm not having to start from scratch. I'm not having to start from a template necessarily, but I'm actually starting from something that we've used before, where we can use the experience that we had from that particular previous project. In a similar way, throughout the project's lifecycle, I may need to use different tools to actually manage my documents and content, but I want to have a single interface to do that. So, there's different places where these kind of have different benefits. Obviously SharePoint is more structured than, say, OneDrive or a group files, which are a bit more basic. But it means that, my OneDrive is my personal documentation. Maybe I start off with doing something that I haven't shared with anyone. Maybe it's some ideas that I'm working on. But at some point, I may want to then share it with people. So I could actually move that content into a group to share it with a project team. And then once it gets to a certain level of maturity or approval, then it can go into SharePoint. So let's see how Harmony actually helps me to do that across all of those interfaces. So if I click on my All Sites view here, you can see that I've got some SharePoint sites that I'm connected to, but also I've got access to my OneDrive and any groups that I'm a member of. So here I'm actually working on a number of different groups and a number of different SharePoint libraries. So in this case, it might be that I go into my OneDrive and I've started working on some market research for a new project. So at this point, I can use contextual menus like we did before to copy and paste, or I can use things like keyboard shortcuts. So again, things that are familiar to people that they've been using for many years. So I can say just like Control-C, then go into one of my groups. Let's say I want to share this with my EMEA team. And I can paste that into there just with a Control-V to paste. And you'll see then I have the opportunity to rename it or whatever I need to do, so it doesn't have to stay the same. But what that means is that's then shared with everybody within that group, so they can start working on it. Also, if they're following that group, they'll be notified that I've put that content into there. So that can then get taken to the next level. Then at some point, okay, now I want to share that with, I want to put it into SharePoint. So again, I can either use a contextual menu there. Let's take the document and go into my construction site that we're working on. Again, I can paste that document into that library and assign the content type and the metadata. So let's just put this in as a particular document. And assign maybe some other properties as well. So let's say this is actually a evaluation. So throughout the life cycle of the project, Harmony can support all the different areas that I need to use. And on that point, hopefully what we've shown you so far has been interesting.
Great, thank you, Richard. So while you start answering the questions that have come in, our question to you is, are you using Harmony? And if you aren't using the enterprise version, would you like a trial version of it? While you answer, Richard, the first question I see is, what versions of SharePoint do you support?
Okay, so we support basically everything from WSS3 upwards, both on-premise and online. So, you know, it could be that you've got some SharePoint 2010 and 2013 sites, but you've got also you're in the process of moving to Office 365. So we're actually able to connect to multiple sites in the same way. Using standard SharePoint web services and whatever authentication methods you have enabled in that SharePoint site.
Great, thank you. Do you support hybrid environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just kind of, moving on from what we've just discussed, it's if I take a look at the sites that I've got access to here or that I've connected to, you'll see that actually some of them are Office 365, but some of them are actually on-premise as well. So you can really have a mixture. You can have different credentials for each of them and things as well. So, if I add another site here, I can provide different credentials to this site than I had to a different site that I've already connected to. So absolutely, you can have a mixed environment of SharePoint, but also, just to say that you're using Office 365 is a bit of a global term because SharePoint Online is part of that. Obviously, Exchange Online is another part of things as well. So it might be that you have Exchange on-premise with SharePoint Online, or vice versa. And basically, we don't actually connect to Exchange directly. We connect to SharePoint. So it doesn't really matter what kind of hybrid environment you have, Harmony can work with them.
Great, thank you. When you show the document content types, are those defined in Harmony or in SharePoint?
So they're defined in the SharePoint library. So if you go into a particular library, let's say here we've got a number of content types that are defined in that library in SharePoint. And Harmony basically utilizes as I say, the SharePoint services to retrieve those from the library when you actually connect. So there's very little configuration you need on a Harmony side. It's really more down to what you've got configured in your SharePoint library. So if I went to a different library as an example, let's say these legal documents, here I've got different content types, and in fact here I've got document sets configured and stuff as well. So it can be completely different in different libraries depending on what you've got configured in SharePoint.
Thank you. And when you were showing the view and edit, when you were sending a link, does that override the SharePoint security that's been set up?
It is part of the SharePoint permissions, to be honest. So it's not really actually a Harmony feature in terms of excuse me, setting the permissions. It's using the share function from SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2016 to basically check and grant access at that point when I'm sending a link to somebody, rather than you having to think before you send it, have they got access and do I need to grant it to them? But also you can do that directly from the sidebar as well. So for example here, I can see who this item is currently shared with, or I can invite additional people from here as well.
Thank you. Do you see a use case for Harmony with MS Teams?
Microsoft Teams, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're kind of in the process of evaluating where there might be a gap in functionality that we can bridge, because obviously that's really what we fundamentally do, is bridge the gaps that are there between the different products. But for example, even with a team, when you create a team, it actually creates a group in the background and some stuff on top of it as well. When you create a group, it creates a group library, a group mailbox, a conversation, and a OneNote, etc. So from a Harmony point of view, because I can actually see the groups that I'm a member of, I can see the teams that I'm a member of as well. So I can get to the documents that relate to that team. We are looking, as I say, to see what we can do with the rest of the team kind of functionality, like with the persistent chat and those kind of things as well.
Thank you. What functions are lost when you're integrating with SharePoint 2013?
SharePoint 2013 is quite rich anyway. The key things that I would say that aren't there from a Harmony point of view is things like the share, which is there in 2016 and SharePoint Online. But that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously, Harmony, as I say, can connect to different versions of SharePoint, and you'll see different functionality enabled, which is enabled in your environment. So, for example, if you don't have managed metadata enabled, you won't have like the filter function, whereas if you do, you will. And as I say, that the key difference from a Harmony point of view between 2013 and say anything newer is that kind of share functionality.
Thank you. Can you automate capturing content?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've integrated to Outlook rules to automate the capture of emails, and we can also extend that to attachments as well, using a bit of configuration. So as an example, if I go into, let's say, one of my libraries here, this correspondence library that relates to this project. So in here, I'm just managing the emails. I haven't got any documents here. So my default content type is email, all that kind of stuff. But what I've done is I've added that as a favorite as a user. Maybe I'm the project leader or something. And what I've done is I've made that available as an Outlook folder. And if we take a look at my Outlook now, we'll see that we have a Harmony entry under here with any of those folders that I added as favorites to make available as folders. What I can then do is I can configure rules in Outlook to say that based on certain criteria, for example here, if there's a particular project name in the subject, then move or copy the email into this particular library in SharePoint.
Great, thank you. There are some more questions which we will get in touch with you shortly to answer. Richard, thank you for that presentation. Thank everyone for joining us today. You'll receive an email with the link to view the webinar within a couple of days, as we said, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.